The trials of those who masterminded 9/11 in Federal District Court in New York City should have occurred here years ago. If the Bush administration had done that in 2004 when it captured these people, they'd have been tried, convicted, and executed by now. The law is clear. If you are accused of violating American law, you are to be tried in the judicial district in which the crime occurred. This is not political correctness. This is not the policy of the present Justice Department. This is what is required by the Constitution. Former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani never complained when Tim McVeigh was tried in federal court in Denver. In the Zacarias Moussaoui case, the one the government assured us was the 20th 9/11 hijacker, Mayor Giuliani not only lauded the prosecution in federal district court in Alexandria, Virginia, he even testified for the government at the trial. Not only that, but Justice Department prosecutors have never lost a terrorism case in federal district court in modern times. The same cannot be said of military prosecutors at Guantanamo Bay. They tried 2 cases to near completion with juries. One was a guilty verdict, and then the court set the defendant free in Yemen because the evidence was weak and he already served enough jail time. The other ended with a plea to a lower level crime, even though the defendant, though labeled a murderer by the government, was set free in Australia. Joining me now is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future for Freedom Foundation. Jake, welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you, Judge. It's nice to be back with you.
Were you surprised that the Obama administration decided that some people would be tried, some people involved in 9/11 and other events against the American government and military would be tried in federal district court in New York, but some would still be tried in military tribunals in Cuba?
Well, it wasn't so much a matter of surprise as just being disappointed. I mean, they did the right thing by moving some of them to federal court. We have the finest judicial system in the world, and that's what they should have done in the first place, because terrorism is a federal crime, which they, of course, acknowledged by taking these people into federal court. But it's an absolute abomination to take another group of people and treat them differently and move them into these military commissions that are really just going to be kangaroo tribunals with preordained verdicts. No due process of law at all.
I don't want to get into the weeds of federal rules of criminal procedure or even the Constitution, but to me, it's inconceivable that they could draw a bright line on one side of which we say, you're going to go to New York, on the other side of which they say, you're going to stay in Cuba. I just don't know how they can make the distinction, and I think that's going to be an issue in the cases in Cuba. Why did so-and-so get to go to New York and have a jury of civilians and all the constitutional protections of the federal courts, but I'm stuck in Cuba with the military guys?
It's entirely subjective, and it violates fundamental principles of equal treatment under law. It violates the rule of law. It's saying, the government is saying, we will decide which avenue you get to take. If we like you, if we think you should be into this course, we'll give you that. If not, we'll put you into this one. And the procedures are dramatically different, as you well know. It's entirely arbitrary. It's ad hoc justice.
What do you say to people, Jake, who argue that, well, you know, military secrets, even national security secrets, even diplomatic secrets can be spilled in a jury trial. You just can't control what's going to come out in a jury trial. Shouldn't these people be tried in a more controlled environment where the press is not there, where a military judge could control what might seep out of the courtroom?
I say that federal courts are well equipped to handle that. They do it all the time. That's why the federal courts were handling the case of Zacarias Moussaoui, one of the so-called 9/11 planners. You've got Jose Padilla. You got all sorts of terrorist suspects that have been tried in federal court. The federal judges sit there and manage it. They set up their parameters for when information is going to be divulged, under what circumstances. This is the federal process. It works very well, Judge.
My thoughts on this, Jake, are that the President and the Attorney General, with respect to moving people to New York, did the right thing for the right reason. If it were a political decision, they wouldn't have brought them here. It's immensely, immeasurably unpopular. I just wish they would respect the Constitution in other areas of what they do, as well as in this area.
Absolutely. I mean, let's keep in mind the reason that they established that camp in Cuba in the first place. It was to avoid the constraints of the Constitution. It was to avoid the federal courts, to avoid federal judges. These are people that take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. They set up a camp to avoid the Constitution. Obama's doing the right thing by moving these people to New York. He ought to do it to all of them. That's what equal treatment under law is all about.
I think that most of our viewers are aware of the fact that the only reason these guys are coming to New York now is because the Bush administration didn't bring them here in 2004, because it kept developing these contorted, weird, odd procedures for trying people. And every single time, Jake, one of those procedures was challenged by the detainees in Guantanamo Bay. The Supreme Court ruled against the Bush administration. So I suspect that Eric Holder, even though I disagree with him on many things, on this thing, understands the law, understands the Constitution, and knows it's time to give them a traditional, fair trial with due process. You know, the due process for which many people have lost their lives so that we can still have it.
Right, and that's what America's always stood for. We have never argued that these people are necessarily innocent. What we've argued is they're entitled to a trial. We all learned that as children. People are entitled to a trial no matter how much the evidence is against them.
What do you say to the argument, and I like to use this and used it on the radio a lot today, that the Constitution was really written to protect the guilty, not to assure that they can triumph over their guilt, but to assure that even the guilty, even the obviously guilty, receive the fairest of fair treatment?
Absolutely. And in the process of doing that, you do your best to ensure that the innocent are never sent to the gallows or to the penitentiary for any period of time. So the ultimate protection here in protecting the rights of the so-called guilty is you protect the innocent from being wrongfully convicted.
Here's another issue that keeps coming up, Jake, and people say all the time in emails and on the radio, well, these people aren't Americans. Why should we give them the same rights that Americans have?
Well, because the Bill of Rights provides that all people accused of a crime, I mean, this is where the United States stands out, or at least used to stand out, is that our position was different from other countries. Our position was, look, you get accused of a crime in this country, and you're going to be entitled to all the rights and guarantees that Americans have. This is not something to be ashamed of. This is something to be proud of, that this is what we Americans stand for. We should be the model for the world.
And the concept of giving people rights rejects our history and rejects our value. Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights. And the Constitution was written to protect persons, not innocent persons, not American persons, but persons, for the very reasons that we are confronting this thing right now.
That's right, Judge. And those procedural protections, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, they were carved out through centuries of struggle against British tyranny. I mean, these rights go back to Magna Carta. People gave their lives and their liberties and their fortunes because of these procedural protections. And we should take pride in that. We should be fighting for these rights, regardless of who is being accused and who is being put on trial. Because if you knock down all the trees in order to get the so-called guilty, what's left to protect the rest of us?
Where would you hide in the wind that then would blow, as Robert Bolt put in the mouth of Thomas More in A Man for All Seasons, if you cut down the trees to get to the devil? But the government sometimes does that.
Well, that's right. We can expect the government to do that, but that's what federal courts are about. Independent tribunals, independent federal judges that are going to ensure that justice is done. That's not what was happening at Guantanamo. These were preordained judgments as to the guilt or innocence of people. They were harshly abused. They were not accorded attorneys in the earlier days until the Supreme Court forced them to. They didn't want any due process of law. They were cooked verdicts.
Jake Hornberger, thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Thank you, Judge.
You can catch today's show on foxnews.com/freedomwatch and on Sirius 145, XM 168, or online at foxnewstalk.com at 6 p.m. Eastern on Saturdays. From New York, defending freedom. Until the next time, stay free, America.